to another episode of the Strive for 25 podcast. And I've got an amazing guest on today, Chris Stout out of New York. And I've been looking for this one for like, I don't know, 14 minutes because we just met officially last week. And but this one's going to be a special interview because this gentleman has built a $50 million portfolio over the last 10, 11 years. And the part that's going to just completely surprise you is how he got started and where he came from. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But Chris, thank you so much for making time for us today and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's awesome meeting you. And actually, the interesting part about the 50 million, it was 10 million a year ago. So we went from 10 to 50 in a year. So the 10 was a slow grind, and then the 10 to 50 is where everything changed. And it was actually just a change of method is all it was.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that, I've had to learn along the way personally is that, growth is not linear. It's exponential. You put all this work in, all this work in, all this work in, and all of a sudden, boom, something changes. You tweak something, and then all of a sudden, boom, things take off. And definitely want to talk about that shortly. But first off, you've got a lot going on. Can you kind of explain a little bit about the things you have going on and what you do?
Yeah. So currently, we build and develop single family, 1 and 2 family homes in Staten Island, New York. And the other side of the business, the larger side of the business, is the most multifamily syndication business. So what we do is we go out, we find and purchase multifamily apartments, multifamily buildings with accredited investors. So we bring in accredited investors who are interested in investing money in real estate and being truly passive. So most real estate investors are not truly passive. They're usually active investors. And then they just categorize their income as passive. But the truth is you're active. You're answering the phone. You're going through the tenants, the problems, the collections, the balancing, everything. So we bring in accredited investors who want to be truly passive. Their job is nothing other than wiring money. And that's it. So to start, we find these assets, we put them on the contract, we obtain and sign for the loan. And when we close, we bring in we gather investor capital and we bring their money to the closing table, and we operate the deal for the set term that we set out for, which at the end of the day winds up being flexible because we don't truly know where the market's going to be in 6 years, 6 to 8 years. But we put a timestamp on it, and in 6 to 8 years, if for some reason the market's in a worse shape than it is today, or it's in a not attractive time to sell, we will hold and maintain the asset until it is a good time to sell. And during that time, we continue to cash flow and everyone pays their rent.
Awesome. So I kind of want to work from present and kind of work our way backwards a little bit. So the last deal that you've done and closed on, can you kind of walk us through just some of the basics of price and units and capital you brought in and just some of the details of kind of how it all works together?
Yeah, so I guess it's good to say at the time of this recording, it is July 2023. And the reason that I'm mentioning it is right now, it's very difficult to get a apartment complex of 100 units or more under contract at a number that makes sense to buy. So we've actually pivoted recently, and the recent deal that we just closed on is 56 units. So right now, at this specific time, it's an attractive time to buy from individuals who own real estate. And the reason I say individuals, mom and pop type sellers who have owned the assets for a long time. They know that 12 to 18 months ago was probably the best time to sell, but from where they purchased, they're still doing much better. Whereas the sophisticated investor just knows at this period, we're not doing anything, we're holding. So the last asset we closed on is 56 units. We bought it for $4.9 million. It's in Northwest Arkansas, specifically Fayetteville, Arkansas, not to be confused with other assets that we own in Fayetteville, North Carolina, right, which is interesting. There was no connection at all. It just happened like that. Northwest Arkansas is a wonderful market. Anyone who's listening, if you're looking for a new market that's going to be emerging into the future, Northwest Arkansas, I put a lot of time and focus in it. So 56 units, 4.9 million. We raised $3 million to close this asset. and we just closed about 2 weeks ago, and we're in operations now. So the first month is probably, you know what? The first month is probably the quietest time of ownership, and the second month is the loudest. The first month, as operators, we have already put the work in prior to close of bringing the absolute best property manager we could find into as a partner. And I label them as a partner because we do give them bonus. We do set up a bonus structure for them. So if they beat and exceed the budget, they get bonuses. So we bring in our property manager, and for the first month, we kind of lay off a little bit. We know they're going through a tremendous amount to get the asset under their control. They're getting the tenants to know where they got to pay now. They don't pay the new guy. They don't pay the old guy. They pay the new guy. They have to switch all the contracts over. So the landscaper has to be switched over. In this case, we fired him as soon as we closed and we hired a new one. Just everything that has to be switched. They're going through heavy action month one. And we know we're okay acquiring an asset and letting it operate how it did the previous month, the first month of ownership for us. After everything in the dust settles, then month two for us is a big push month where we start enacting plans that we've came up with. So we start the business plan typically about month two. We like to say we start right away, but the truth is it really starts to pick up speed month two. And that's basically it. It's off to the races from here. So now we'll operate the deal for the next 6 years. We'll probably refinance the deal in year 3, as long as interest rates aren't completely out of control. We have a 5-year loan on it, 5-year fixed term loan on it. So if for some reason in 2 years it's a bad time to refinance, we'll just hold it until it is a good time to refinance. And that's it. We collect rent and pay investors.
So I like how you outline that, kind of just real quick, start to finish. One of the questions that I have, and maybe some other people out there have, you mentioned, I think 4.9 million purchase price, right? So you bring in the capital, 3 million, and are you going to be doing any type of updates or renovations or anything else along the lines?
Yes. So as far as our criteria is concerned, we try to get to as close as we can to a well-maintained property with poor management. So a property that needs zero work and needs a turn on the management. So the management didn't keep up with making sure that the right people were in, making sure that the rents were up to where they need to be, but they took care of the building. So we try to get as close to that as we possibly can. On this asset, this thing was built in 2001, so the structure itself, the building itself, literally needs no work. In that period of time, so the first 20 years of a building being built, usually the only major thing we have to worry about are the roofs. The parking lots in Arkansas are concrete, so they're actually in very good shape. I believe we have one crack to repair. Right before we closed, we put it in the contract that they had to change the roofs that weren't changed, so now we have all fresh roofs on them. And so we have to go in now. We have to power wash, paint decks, and change and upgrade the landscaping. That's the amount of work we have to put in. The unit turns or the unit renovations, we don't force them. We do them as necessary. So we don't push a tenant out to do the renovations. We do the renovations because a tenant left. So sometimes a tenant will leave for natural reasons. They're moving on in their life or whatever. And another reason is when we do acquire the asset, we raise the rent. So we raise the rent. It could be $200 a month for a unit. And I mean, that's how the business makes money. Is we buy an underperforming asset, we raise the rent, we get the revenue up. We charge more for what we know we could charge for. So we go in, we do that, and that's basically it. So day one, we go in, we brush up the landscape, and we power wash it, clean it up, and start raising rents.
That's awesome. So the structure of the financing, you talk about 3 million capital versus call it $5 million purchase price. You're going to have some closing costs and other things you're going to have for operating capital. But from just a straight up deal standpoint, where would you say that your LTV, your balance of your loan is compared to the purchase price? So if you're okay sharing, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll share anything. Yeah. The numbers are the most fun part. So that's we want to give the people what they want.
That's right.
So, uh, so we borrow up to about 2.5 million bucks. So we need about $2.5 million to close the deal. Uh, the rest is closing costs, which are comprised of all standard closing costs that you guys know about. So title and lawyers and the 1,000 fees that are listed on a closing statement. There's a ton of people making a lot of money at a closing.
Yep. Yep.
So, and then our acquisition fee. So our acquisition fee, typically, depending on the assets, between 2 and 3% of the purchase price of the asset. So for us putting the whole deal together and getting it closed, we make somewhere in the 160 something $1,000 range. That's a check written right to us, and that's our pay. That's our payment for putting the deal together. Over the course of ownership, we charge a 3% asset management fee. So depending on the asset, it's between 2 and 3%. On assets 100 units and plus, all these fees come down because we're able to do the deal with less percentage, but the number's higher. So we're able to operate a business. When the deal sizes become smaller, we need to charge a little bit higher in the percentage just to make it. We can't make, $160,000 sounds like a lot of money, but you close a couple assets a year, take out regular operating business expenses. We can't be operating a business this size, taking in, $500,000 for the year and expecting that we're going to stay in business. It's just not possible. So we charge a 3% on this specific asset. We charge a 3% asset management fee. And then we charge a 1% fee at refinance. So when we refinance the asset, whatever the loan amount at that time would be, we charge 1%. So we'll call it, if we borrow $4.5 million, we'll make another 45, 50,000 bucks there. And then the big payday for a syndicator is at the end. So the syndication business is set up very nicely in the sense that the investors make all the money in the beginning, and then we get paid at the end. So the investor's return is front end loaded. And if we perform for the investors over the course of the ownership, when we sell is when our portion of the deal kicks in. So when we sell on an asset this size, the proceeds coming to us are about $2 million. So it sounds great, but remember, we went into a business for the super, super long haul. Most of you listening probably initially aren't interested in putting in work now for free for the next 6 years. And I say free, you hear a couple $100,000. It's not the goal. We're not even concerned about that money. Like, to make real money, millions of dollars, we basically worked for years for free-ish to really get that money. So that's the true example of you have to put the work in first and then get paid for it. So we obtain What's that?
I was going to say, as a syndicator, how many people would you say are involved on your side of it, setting the deal up, all the reports and management and keeping everything in line? Like, how many people are involved on your side of the transaction?
So it's typically 2 to 3. The business at the stage that we're at does not require that many people. So usually it's an individual with the net worth and liquidity in order to do the deal. So that's me. So I have to sign my net worth against the loan. A good fact to know, and a lot of people don't know this, in commercial loans, you could only borrow up until your net worth. So you have a $10 million net worth, they'll let you borrow $10 million. So if you have a $10 million net worth fee, you go out and buy a $15 million deal, $14 million deal. You put down $4 or $5 million, and then you could borrow the rest. And then there's the remainder of the roles kind of get split up, and then they'll start to get separated as the business grows. So you have a acquisitions manager. He's in charge of bringing the deals in. Then you have an asset manager. He's in charge of running the deals. And then you have investor relations. They're in charge of managing the investors. So right now we have an investor relations person. My partner is acquisitions, and I'm the front end, find the deal. I'm meeting the investors. So right now the investor relations side is basically maintenance. We don't have anyone on our staff other than me bringing in outside investors. So for me, it's still working off of past relationships slash past relationships of past relationships. So it's basically my immediate circle plus one or two. Looking into the future, we're going to put a course together, and we'll do online marketing. And the best way to get new investors, from what we understand, and I could probably tell you it's true just from personal experience, is educating. So if we could educate you, you're going to do one of three things. You're going to ignore it and go back to doing whatever you're doing and forget everything I told you. You're going to take action yourself, which is awesome. Or you're going to say, holy shit, this guy knows what he's talking about. I'm going to invest with him. So that's kind of how it all works. And that's the course going forward, is just going to be to continue to separate those roles I just went through.
So those listeners out there, when we talk about, $1 million, $5 million, $50 million, these are huge numbers. But I think, me personally, I'm at a point in my life where, kind of going back to the whole growth is not linear, it's exponential. There's things that I've kind of gone through that, oh shit, like 15 different things happened. And then all of a sudden, like one thing takes off. And, when we get back to a little bit of your journey from the very beginning, and where you came from on this, and showing that literally, like I keep talking about on this platform, how does the everyday person get ahead and build wealth? And for a lot of people that aren't getting traction, quote unquote, you got to start somewhere, and you got to start very, very small, start to stack up some wins and keep the engine moving. We say all the time, when your why is strong enough, the how figures itself out. You don't have to have all the answers today. So just if you're here listening to this at this point, we're going to get into the good stuff. Sorry, this is great stuff, but the other part of the good stuff is coming soon. I want to kind of go backward.
I want to say something. I want to say something to people that fit the criteria of what you just said. So I could tell you personally, and actually you sent me an Alex Hormozy video the other day, that highly successful people, they have some level of I'm never good enough. And I could tell you that I feel the exact same way. So you guys listening to me, you might hear it in my voice. You might hear it in my voice, or some things I say where, oh, he's being humble, or I can't believe he's talking about those numbers like that. $50 million of real estate owned, to me now, feels like nothing. But I remember a time where it sounded impossible. And I can tell you that there's no easy part of it, and it takes a tremendous amount of pressure in a tremendous amount of locations. And I all the time inside feel like, am I going to make more money into the future? Am I going to get another deal? Is something else going to come true? And I just keep pressure all the time in every direction. And once in a while, my phone will ring, or I'll get an email and say, hey, Chris, congratulations, that deal is approved. Or, hey, we won this deal. This guy's ready to sign a contract. And it's like, holy shit. Like I've been thinking for the past 3 weeks, all the pressure I've been applying is nothing, and I'm out of business. So it's funny. I'm building a house for myself now in the Jersey Shore. And I told my wife, I'm like, you know what? We shouldn't do this house. It's a house on the water. I'm like, we shouldn't do it. This is going to be too much money for us. And the reason is because I'm looking at my income and my current bank account, my whole circle, right? And I look at it and I'm like, if I don't make another dollar between now and 2 years from now, I'm going to be in trouble. And it's a kind of funny concept to think like, no, so I'm what happens if I make money in the next 2 years? Like everything will be okay. So it's a tremendous amount of pressure, being unsure where everything's headed, and eventually things come of it. There is no shortcut. If you listen to me or you watch videos of gurus online or any of that, just understand that if you see someone getting on a private jet or any of that, it's not like, man, what is he doing? I'm going to redirect all my energy to what he did. Now, it's a tremendous amount of pressure for a long period of time, and eventually something comes true. So if you feel like you're getting nowhere, just keep leaning. As long as the other side of it is, and I heard Brad Lee say this, if no one who's doing what you're doing is making the money you want to make, you shouldn't be doing it. So that's the whole other side of it. So I could look at it and say like, hey, do guys who own $100, $500 million worth of real estate, Would I be okay with that life? Yes. Okay, I'm going to keep pushing. Versus when I was younger, I owned a renovation business. Is there any renovation company that I know of that the guy who owns it is making the money that I want to make? Home renovation company. And the answer was no. So getting into the whole, if I would expand it and say, well, in commercial construction, is there someone making the money I want to make? The answer would be yes, but I wasn't in commercial construction. I was in residential. So basically what I'm saying is if you look in your immediate circle, or just even if you expand it and you say, is anyone making the money I want to make in my circle or my industry? If the answer is no, then that's when you have to redirect. But if the answer is yes, then keep pushing, baby.
Okay. So then we're going to just go on this. So when you started this out in 2011, 2012, you had a regular job, started doing stuff on the side, started stockpiling cash. Can you kind of catch up our listeners of what was going on in that light and at that point in time, and what was your vision? What was your focus of what was possible? And then that same question of your circles and who was around you and
Yeah.
redirecting, like where did you go and why?
Yeah. So I started out in 2005 as a New York City fireman. Um, in 2000, I guess I applied for that job in 2002, 2003. Got on the fire department in 2005. When I got on that job, I asked somebody, it's a funny thing, but when I got on, I was in training. I asked someone who had a brother on the job, could I quit? Could I quit if I want? And they're like, well, yeah, you could quit if you want. And it was all the way back to then that I knew that I needed to be thinking bigger and do bigger things. So that job, specifically that job, we worked 24-hour shifts. So your life was as free or as packed as you wanted it to be. You could turn the dial up and work 7 days a week, or you could turn the dial down and be okay with your $100,000 a year and work 2 days a week. So I chose the path of I'm going to work 7 days a week. I'm going to make my 150,000 bucks or 125,000 bucks from that job, and I'm going to grow a business while I have that job. So I started a home renovation company. That home renovation company provided enough money for me to buy my first rental property. That was the number one reason I started that company, was to be able to put money together to buy rental property. So I would save up 100,000, buy a rental property, save up 100,000, buy a rental property, on and on and on, back and forth. That business wound up growing large enough to do custom home remodels, custom home building. When you build a custom house for somebody, you're building a relationship or killing one. So I took those relationships, which I formed very good ones, and I leveraged those relationships to make people my investors in a spec home building business. So now I started building houses to sell. So I'm itching my way up the slide to get further into churning money than churning clients. So when you're building a house for someone or doing a renovation on someone's house, you're in bed with them. You're basically, if you're building a house for a husband and wife, you're the third partner in that marriage. It's a very close relationship. So the goal kind of is to keep inching my way out of that world. And I leverage those relationships to do it. So successfully built houses for many years, used investors to do it. So my own capital, investor capital, and then even investor. I had some investors that acted as a lender, some investors that acted as equity. Equity is more expensive than lending. So just leverage relationships all the way up and then look back on the whole thing and say, okay, where did the energy go and where did the money come from? So starting at the beginning was necessary to get to where I was, but almost relatively no energy went into the rental business. Energy went in, but relatively no energy went in. So if I was spending 100 hours a week, 10 hours a week would be in rentals, 90 hours a week would be on building homes, custom homes for clients. So the money was coming from the investing, not so much the earning. So I was like, you know what? maybe we should bring in and turn these investors into apartment investors. It's longer term. Some of my investors would say, "Hey, Chris, this is great, but the money comes back too quick, and then I have to worry about what to do with it again." And in my head was like, "No, I churn the money and I hand it back to you. I churn it, I hand it back to you." And investors were like, "Well, what can we do that's longer that we don't have to worry about the money? Meaning we don't have to get it back. Leave it out. I want it to keep working for me. I don't want it to come back to me." Because in development, then they're like, "Well, when do you need it again?" I'm like, "Well, I don't need it for another 6 months because we're waiting for something to get approved." Okay, so now the money's sitting in their bank account, which at that time they're earning no interest and it's just sitting there. So bringing the same people and growing that into apartment investing that's basically the whole run. Now we're here. Now we have investors investing in apartments with us.
What year was that transition into apartments?
So that was 2022, last year.
Okay. So that was that,
a year and a half ago is when we made the switch. So
10 to 50 was that transition to apartments.
That's right. So we're not new with investors. We're not new with apartments. So this is what separates us from someone who just started buying apartments and in the syndication business. The big difference between my group and those groups are those groups woke up and said, "I think we should start buying multifamily with investors." I'm not new to apartments. I was just doing it without my investors. And I'm not new to construction, or I'm not new with investor capital because I was doing it just in a different fashion. I was doing it with construction, not apartments. So we basically just did a little switch internally, and it was lights out. Like, it shot up $40 million. And, I hesitated on 2022. I guess the whole process probably started in 2021, but actually started to acquire deals. It takes a long time to be able to buy that first deal, because you're talking about $8, $9, $10 million purchases. You start calling those brokers who are much more sophisticated than your standard, residential what's the word? Real estate agent was the word I was looking for. They're like, "Oh, who's this guy? New guy? How many have you bought? Who are you?" So to break past that barrier took some time. But 2022 was really when the culmination of probably a year and a half of efforts started to really pick up some speed. And then it was 10 million to 50 million in 12 months.
So from 2005, starting out as a fireman.
Yep.
And then until you stockpiled that first 100K, how much time elapsed from there into that first 100K of cash?
How long did it take me to save up 100,000? Probably 6 months, 6 to 8 months.
So that was like an 05 or 06 timeframe?
Yeah.
And that was just from working the 7 days or plus the rental stuff?
Oh, so that was so, if you're making 100, so say at the time as a fireman, I was making 70 or 80,000 bucks. I was a single guy living at my mother's house. My mother charged me $400 a month rent, which I still think was a wonderful lesson, by the way. So making that kind of money and doing the kitchen and bath renovations, you could make some good money doing home remodels, kitchen and bath, because when you first start, you're competing against guys with a full operating company. So if you're capable enough and you're willing to work hard enough and you're willing to go out, invest some money in tools, and like a little bit of a cheat code was I was just born with the ability that I was able to figure that stuff out. So some people in their 50s still can't change a light bulb. Me, I look at something. When I was even younger, I ran a mechanics business out of my mother's house. I was always very mechanically inclined naturally. I can't throw a ball or play football to save my life, but the ability for me to, look at something, see what's broken about it and fix it, I was just born with it. So if you have that, you could make some good money in the home renovation business for sure. And there's obviously an unlimited amount of houses in this country. In any market you live in, there's room to make money. So I leveraged it, and to put together $100,000. Some people listening and be like, man, they'll almost stop listening right there and be like, that in itself is impossible. It is so not impossible, man. It is so possible to scrap together 100,000. And how about this? If you feel the way that I just said, it's impossible to scrape up 100,000, but you could sit and watch a movie for 2 hours and not feel any anxiety that you should be doing something else, your problem lies right there. You need to be always moving and thinking about what your next move is. And if you're not, you're wasting a lot of time. A lot of people, I've actually heard this from Grant Cardone. A lot of people talk shit about what happens in the 40 hours of the week that they're working. So they'll spend the remaining 135, I believe it's 135 hours. Don't quote me on the math. I think that's what it is. Remaining of the week after you work 40 hours. So if you work 40, you got an extra 135 sitting around. They'll spend the 135 talking shit about what they're making in the 40 instead of saying, okay, that 40, I'm making money with that 40. Just leave that alone. What could I do with the remaining 135? If you're not optimizing that time, and obviously you have to take some out for sleep, but if you're not optimizing that time, you're probably the same person who's saying it's impossible to put together $100,000. So, manage your time better and make sure you're feeling that anxiety if you're sitting down for 2 hours, comfy, watching a movie for 2 hours. Yeah, that your problem will lie right there.
When you lay at night in that time frame and you're saying, hey, I'm going to go work my tail off and go work on this renovation project and go get cash, what was your why? What was your vision at that point in time? And you're what, 20, 22, 25,
yes.
23?
Yes. 23. I could tell you a mistake I made when I was younger is I didn't have it. So my idea was I'm going to make as much money as possible. Well, how much do you want to make? Well, as much as possible. And you're like, and I would talk to some people who were further than me, like, you have to have a goal. And I'm like, no, my goal is just to make as much money as possible. And a lot of aggressive, hungry people have the same thought. It's like, no, I'm just going to make as much as I can. And I didn't realize until I got older, probably into my mid 30s, I didn't realize what that meant. And what it means is if you have a goal of making $1 million a year to $5 million a year, and you're doing things that make you $10,000, $5,000, $1,000, you're never going to get there. So having a goal helps you not do what you're supposed to do. It helps you stop doing what you shouldn't be doing. So if you're doing actions that will repeatedly make you 1, 2, 3, 5,000 a week, whatever it is, you're like, okay, this is great, but this will never add up to where I need to be. I'm just burning time. And actually, at the time of when I had $10 million of real estate, my net worth at the time was probably $3 or $4 million. And I said, all right, if I want to get to, so then I was like, you know what? I have a goal, $100 million net worth. And I'm like, doing the math, it took me 10 years to get to 3 million, 3.5 million, whatever it was. That shit ain't going to happen. Like, I have to change gears. And like, people are like, well, you're doing so great. Like, yeah, sure, I am to your standard, but to where I need to be, this isn't going to work. I have to change gears. And when I started setting goals is when I realized, it helped me get into the next realm of what I needed to be doing.
So when you were saying before, at that time, my goal is just to make as much money as possible, not really having any type of vision or destination in mind. Were you running from something, running towards something? What was the thought process back in that time frame?
For me, it's listen, all the way back to when I was 17, 16. I made it. I made enough money to support the lifestyle. I made enough money to support the lifestyle that I wanted. So, I have a $50 million real estate portfolio, and this is my watch. I don't, I'm surrounded by guys with cases of Rolexes, and I think I'm fairly good at holding back the lifestyle creep. But I always, in my head, were like, oh, it'd be cool to own a Lambo or a Ferrari one day and be able to buy it without thinking about it. So, I even today, this life that I think I want, I could probably go grab it if I wanted to. So I really don't know. Why does Donald Trump want to become president again? The guy's a billionaire. He already did it. Why are all these people so driven to just do? It's just about winning the game. That's really it. I just want to play and win. And comparatively to anyone who's listening, the feeling you get for, I'm going to name a random team because I don't know anything about it, the Giants to win the Super Bowl, whatever that is, whoever it is. And trust me, I know nothing about sports. The Giants to win the Super Bowl, the feeling that you could imagine the craziest person has over that happening, and then the happiness that they feel once the Giants win. So it's not them winning, it's someone, you're happy about someone else winning, but the joy that I witness people have, or them talking about it, the amount that they talk about it during the playoffs, during the year, that's how I feel about making money. I have no emotion towards that at all. And just imagine that feeling you have. That's what lives inside of me for making money. So why do you want the Giants to win? Because really, at the end of the day, the Giants don't know who you are, and who the hell gives a shit? Like, they win the Super Bowl, and congratulations. They all make a ton of money, and you go back to your boring life. So why? Why do you want them to win? Like, I don't know. I like them, and I want them to win. So for me, this goal of $100 million net worth or $1 billion of real estate, I don't know why it lives inside of me, but it just does.
Kind of back to that same topic. Why do you think people are not thinking in those terms? Why do they not believe that it's possible to go down that pathway or whatever it is in building something?
So I think actually, if it doesn't live inside you, don't try to create it inside of you, because I could tell you that I have a friend, actually was a neighbor of mine in the last house that I lived in, guy Anthony. He looks at me and he's like, dude, you are crazy how much you're always working and grinding. He's actually a lieutenant on the New York City Fire Department. And he lives this life of, yo, I'm cool, man. Like, I have the fire department. It's awesome. My days off, I call them it's tinker time. So when the weather gets warm, I'm like, I used to come out of my house. I'm like, tinker time. He likes, like, on his days off, he messes around with his lawnmowers and gets his kids quads, and he's involved with their stuff. And I actually look at him, and I think that he's richer than I am, because he doesn't have that pressure on him, like that unrelenting pressure that lives with me inside of my head. So I think you should be listening to this stuff if you have that pressure and you're trying to relieve it, or you're trying to satisfy it. But if that pressure doesn't live inside of you, don't look at yourself and say, why doesn't it live inside of me? Because you could hang up this podcast and go back to your life and just really enjoy it. The need to have $100 million, or the need to have $1 billion worth of real estate, or the need to make a couple $1 million a year, once you hit it, I'll be no happier than anyone listening to this. And the guys who make that money aren't any happier than someone who's happy with the way that they're living. So just be careful of that. I don't know if that answered your question, but I feel really strongly about if you don't have the bug to go get it, like don't feel like you need to develop that bug to go get it. Like I'm
Well,
almost envious of the people who feel like they hit it already.
I just think it's such an important conversation because just on my little bitty podcast that has a few listeners, right? Like there's different people that have a similar type of mindset and they're go get it, go do it, make it happen. That bug inside them that's pushing them to get outside their comfort zone. It manifests itself in different ways for whatever their passion is or their skill set is or where they see they can deliver value into the marketplace. And like one of the guys that is a friend of mine that I've only met just because of this whole kind of process of the podcast, Marco Shiro in Hawaii, and a, a firefighter. And he met a buddy that was investing in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and buying single families in Pittsburgh and scaling up. And so, he had a pension, and good. All he had to do was get a few more years in, and he'd be good with his pension. But his father, had a stroke, I think at 66, and it's like I'm not. What if something happens to me before that time? I don't want to wait till 65 to retire. And so he got that
Mm-hmm.
real estate bug and started investing. I think he scaled like 14 properties in 2 years, and it's got that cash flow and that other lane going for him. It's like now if something else happens with his job or health or whatever, he has something else to show for rather than just something that's out of his control. So I just think it's so important to talk about this stuff because people may have this same kind of thing inside them, but maybe it manifests in a different way. It doesn't have to be a certain dollar amount of real estate, net worth or whatever. It can be something else. It could be a business, a consulting business or whatever it is. But you
Well,
started.
I can tell you that how about I can tell you that if you don't have the bug inside of you, the desire to become financially free at a minimum should be inside of you. So I probably left that part out where I shouldn't have. If you don't realize what being financially free feels like or looks like, you should learn. So financially free is an example of, there's many ways of financial freedom, but one example of it is you have enough passive income to offset your lifestyle. So it's a skill because it could very well be that you develop this passive income to offset your lifestyle, and all of a sudden your lifestyle creeps up, and now you go buy a car 3 times the amount of what you were originally driving. But if you could, how about this? I think the absolute most happiest people are the people who could create enough passive income to offset their lifestyle, and they remain their life. They keep their lifestyle relatively within that mean. And now you're living that nice lifestyle. So a lifestyle that you could afford, whatever it may be. Even say Ritz-Carlton. Say you were living a lifestyle where you would go away quarterly, 4 times a year, and you would say to Ritz-Carlton, you develop a passive income lifestyle enough to handle that. And now that part of your life is set. At a bare minimum, you're going away quarterly at a Ritz-Carlton at a destination of your choice. And when you're home, you're going out to eat 2 to 3 times a week. Like you figure out how to handle that amount of money needed to do that. And then you just live that, and anything more is just extra. That is, to me, that's like the ultimate happiness because you're living worry free. You're not worried about where's my next dollar coming from.
Kind of
I
going
have
back.
that, and I still worry about it, but that's just an internal problem that I have.
Totally. When you look back, along the way, you had your path that you were going down, this internal drive to keep, stockpiling cash, invest in real estate,
Mm-hmm.
do other things, but have the renovation business and then building custom houses. What was
Mm-hmm.
that first moment in time, whether it be maybe a mentor or contact or a book, or what was that first thing that raised your trajectory to kind of a higher level that you weren't even aware of?
The first Grant Cardone Real Estate Summit.
How long ago was that?
That's a great question. Do you edit these podcasts?
Yeah. Take your time.
Even if you don't, you can leave it on. Just put listeners, just put some
Some gentle music on. Yeah. I mean,
some music on.
part of that question, this kind of
I
goes
believe
back
it was
to
2021. I'm actually
2021.
I'm actually
Because Patrick Bet Dave is somebody, I mentioned quite a few times on this channel, and he kind of coins that a paradigm shift moment, that point in time where your trajectory changes. Maybe it's a struggle, a hurdle, or a learning along the way that just changes the way you look at things.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
when you look back on that summit, what hit you? What changed?
Um, it was 2020, July 28th, 2021, 2 years ago. 2 years ago, where I was like, that's kind of where I was like, wow, these guys are talking such big numbers and what's possible. I don't think I'm ever going to hit that point in the speed that I'm going. So Grant is actually, if you've never been to a Grant Cardone event, that guy could hold a room for 3 days completely by himself and not repeat himself once. Crazy. Um, he's an excellent, if anything else, he's an excellent speaker. And he's very good at delivering his message. Probably partly plays into his success. But yeah, that was a big shift for me, that event. And it was actually a buddy of mine, which is actually a really cool thing. A buddy of mine. So it's how one thing leads to another. I could very easily look back and say, like, oh, maybe I wonder what would have happened if I didn't join the fire department, right? A friend of mine from the fire department, I was sitting down with him, and he's looking on his phone. He's like, oh, shit, look at this. Real estate summit, Grant Cardone. And he's like, go get your credit card. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, go get your credit card. Come on. Book 2 VIP tickets. I'll come with you. I'm like, yeah, sure,
Oh
on my
shit.
credit card. He's like, yeah, just book it. Come on, I'll come with you. And a good friend of mine, Scott Amendola, he's the reason that I went. Booked it. We went, and somehow we wound up in Grant Cardone's apartment.
No shit.
That guy there. So
Cool.
he's the reason that I went. So I probably don't, being not saying it out loud, I probably don't remind him enough that he's the reason, but he's the reason I went,
That's
and
awesome.
that's it. That's it. Yeah. And
What?
I don't know if you put the video out of this thing, but so that's me and Grant in his apartment.
No
And then I'm
shit.
going to show you a cool, funny photo. This is Scott grabbing Grant by the face outside his apartment. And you can see Ryan in the background there enjoying it.
Right. So how does that, like, side note, how does that even happen? You go to an event and there's hundreds of people there, maybe thousands, I don't know. How do you get back there?
Dude, we paid our way in. We paid our way.
Yeah. VIP plus something else, or
Yeah, it was. So we were in VIP, and then they're trying to sell those front row tickets to platinum seats. They're $25,000, and so him, Scott, same guy, was like, "Come on, just do it, just do it." So it was another 22,500 because we paid the first 2,500 to get in, and then like it's an extra 22,500 to get into the platinum, and which actually we did it, and Grant still owes us a helicopter ride, and we can't find the receipt, but I think he owes us time in his office, one-on-one. I keep telling Scott to look it up, but anyway, so Scott was like, "Dude, we have to do this," and I'm like, "Wow, this is some heavy shit." Okay, swipe the card, 22,500, right to
damn,
Grant Cardone.
damn. What's in terms of just a comment or a message or the way he carries, like what stands out when you're around him? What stands out that you maybe you weren't aware of or didn't think about in terms of how he
Uh,
carries?
he doesn't waste his time with he doesn't waste 1 second of his time on anybody, which is bad and good. A lot of times we find ourselves in conversations too long, or dealing with relationships for too long, or anything that might be holding you back. You watch a guy like Grant, and you're like, that guy doesn't waste one moment. If something isn't bettering him, he's out. Whether it be a conversation and anything, if it's not bettering, if whatever he's doing is not bettering him, he has no part in it at all.
And that kind of goes back to what you were saying before of getting clearer on your goals and actions it takes to be able to get to a certain dollar amount of net worth. The things that you were doing before were gonna carry you there if you keep on going. Anything else you want to add on to that? Like, what kind of going back to the scaling in the apartment complexes? You know, you go to this event, you witness this, you kind of see things from a different perspective. Then what happened next?
Well, we're here, right? I guess.
Right. I mean, this last 12 months has flown by for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, now we're in so it's kind of a funny thing. We got into this business at the perfectly right / wrong time. Um, we thought we got into the business late because the world was in an apartment buying frenzy last couple of years. Now all those people are kind of in trouble because they got loans that are not favorable to them now. Whereas we're starting when it's slow. We know what to plan for, and we're going to be buying on the downward curve. So that to us is attractive, although slightly frustrating because it's tough to acquire deals. But we know we're buying on the downward curve, and we're okay because we know the curve will turn and go back up.
So when you say downward curve, I know what you mean by that, and there's probably a million things that can go into that conversation. But commercial real estate versus residential real estate, and then you kind of dig into apartment complexes, inflation. How would you kind of explain downward curve in that regard?
Commercial real estate, from what we could see today, July 2023, will be worth less in 6 months from now than it is today. Will it be worth less in 12 months from now? Maybe. Will it be worth more than it is now in 3 years from now? Probably not. It'll probably be worth more than it is today. But while it's an evident downward curve, so interest rates will continue to climb, which will push the value of commercial real estate down. Commercial real estate, as opposed to residential real estate, is based less off emotion and more on numbers, where residential real estate is based more upon emotion than numbers. People need a house to live in a certain spot. I have to buy it no matter what it costs. I'll figure out the rest. Commercial real estate, we make more sophisticated decisions where if this thing ain't making money, we're not buying it. Do we make a little bit of a judgment call saying, if we buy it in this area has a better trajectory than this area, will we pay a little bit more for it? Sure. But if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. So if interest rates go up, commercial real estate values come down. If interest rates go up, residential values, well, who the hell knows? They could go up or down or not or whatever. Who knows? So I'm not speaking on residential prices because also as commercial real estate, we don't have to buy something. So residential real estate, people have to buy something. They have to live somewhere. I guess the alternative is rented apartment, which we would benefit from. But so inventory being low on residential real estate pushes prices up, or at least keeps them flat, whereas inventory low on commercial real estate does a little bit, but not much, because the guys who buy it don't have to buy it. They don't have to purchase it. Unless they're a 1031 buyer, which means that the values, they'll pay higher than we'll ever even think about paying. But that's a whole other conversation. 1031, it's tax advantages, and could go on and on about that. So we're, from what we understand, we're in commercial real estate now buying something that we know will probably be worth less than 6 months. But if those of you listening say, well, why would you buy it? That's a great question. And the reason is you're not. So our competition is low right now because everyone thinks that it'll be worth less than 6 months, which they're right. But we don't buy these things to make money in 6 months. We buy these things to make money in years. So the biggest reason I've seen people don't get into real estate is because they don't look further enough out. So we have the vision to look out. And if you're saying I'm crazy, I promise you I'll have more money than you in 6 months, 6 years from now.
6 months, 6 years. Big difference there.
Yeah.
So rates coming down at some point in time, I think we both would agree that would probably have a positive impact on commercial values.
It will, rates coming down will have a positive impact on commercial values. Yes, absolutely. It is directly correlated. Interest rates are directly correlated to what, directly correlated to the price.
From the people that you're talking to in your groups, syndicates, investor friends, network, any thoughts on CPI, inflation, the Fed, 6 months, 12 months, any thoughts on what to expect there?
Um, y- it's all a guess, right? I mean, inflation numbers seem to be coming down. People are maintaining their jobs. I think the job report just came out. We've had a halt in layoffs. So people not losing their jobs is a problem, as crazy as that may sound.
Yeah.
People not losing their jobs is a problem because what it's going to do is it will say, okay, we got to keep raising rates. So inflation has to come down and people have to start losing some jobs in order for rates to relax. Because if people aren't losing their jobs, the indicator is, well, I guess we're doing okay with where we are. And the reason these indicators are so powerful is, the public cries verbally and out loud, they cry, but their actions speak louder than their words. And if we raise rates and you keep buying houses, well, you're okay. You're saying you're not okay because you don't want to pay more. No one wants to pay more, but you're all right.
That makes total sense. People spending money on consumer goods, going out,
Yeah.
food, I think spending is still happening, let alone rates. I mean, it's crazy. When I look back in December of 21,
Mm-hmm.
we were locking in rates still in the low threes. And then,
Yeah.
May, we were in the 5.5 range. And June, I look at my personal numbers on my team. We had a good June closing month, but like actual originations in June of 22, like just fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
And, that we went from 5.5 to 6.5 within like a couple of weeks, and just everything stopped.
Yeah.
And looking back on things, this is one of the things I've talked about a few times on the channel that's just really interesting is that like the individual month of CPI in May and June of 22 was like 1.1 and 1.2 individually. And then July happened and it was like zero. The month of July 22 was zero, just fell off a
Mm-hmm.
cliff as well. And I look at that and some of these numbers fall off of CPI soon. I think CPI right now is already in the threes. So it's going to be a very interesting thing. Kind of going back to the residential side of things, is like if rates do go down by 1% at some point in time, every single person that's off on the sidelines is going to jump back in the game, and prices are going to continue to go up. And are we going to be in the same
Blow up.
position we were before of inflation creeping back
Exactly.
up? So it's
Exactly.
just a weird time
Yeah.
from
Oh.
a standpoint of kind of coming full circle. You mentioned accredited investors or something that you're bringing in to be able to continue to do deals.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you've got your social media platform up. Where can people find you if they want to follow you along? And trust me, you need to follow
Yeah.
Chris because he's got some good stuff out there.
Official Stout on Instagram. So official Stout on Instagram. That's where all our content starts, and then it gets branched off from there. But official Stout on Instagram. Follow me, DM me, whatever. I'll be there for you. We try to put out great content, good information, and yeah, that's it.
If you've got somebody that you're talking to one on one, and they've got a job making $50,000, $60,000 a year, doesn't matter what age bracket, and they said, hey, you know what? Like, I need to get things going on the side. What are some of the top 3 or 4 things that you've seen people do on the side that have had success in terms of generating extra income and extra revenue?
I'll probably have to. I think I have to jump after this, but um, the world's a different place than it was 10 years ago when I first started. So, but the first thing, as far as I know, like just taking my own brain and saying what I did, any kind of service you could provide somebody. So, all the way down to washing windows on a house. I mean, I watched some guy online, and I know this would work. You go around to neighborhoods, you have a crew behind you, and you start ringing bells and say, "Hey, man, right now, for $600, I'll wash all the windows on your house." You'll get plenty of clients where you'll probably have more work than you know what to do with. So that aggressive, ring the bell, see what people want. The idea of mastering any sale, so it'd be cold calling or door knocking or any of that, awesome. And then the second thing is online. I mean, endless amounts of things you could do online to make money these days. It's I gave my kids the idea. I said, start taking videos off Instagram, editing them, take shit videos you find off of Instagram, edit them, send them back to the people for free, and say, from now on, I'll edit all your videos for $50. Like, there's endless amounts of stuff you could do. It's really, really cool.
That's
Uh,
awesome. That's awesome.
online is awesome, but ringing bells, any kind of sales, it's great.
All right, I know you got to jump off here, but thank
Yeah.
you so much for spending time with us and sharing a little bit about your background and story. And I'm sure we'll be catching up very soon.
Yep. Sounds good, man. Talk to
All
you
right.
soon. Thanks for
Thanks,
having
Chris.
me. Yep.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.